Hello, my name is Emile Revier. I am a partner at Postgrad Maxon, and I have the honor of presenting to you today our views on the relation between city spatial development and climate change mitigation and adaptation. I'm presenting from the comfort of my home, as you all will probably be following this lecture due to COVID measures. As an office, we work from The Hague, working on several spatial strategies, spatial design, rooted in the profession of urbanism and urban planning. And here's a picture of the place we work from in The Hague, a place I miss very dearly at the moment since we are all restricted to working at home, but we hope in the near future to be able to return there swiftly. Our office works on various scale levels, varying from strategies for countries, regions and cities, like this strategy for the region of Antwerp and the 20th century ring of the city that we carried out a couple of years ago, focusing on the possibilities of introducing microcentrality in the 20th century ring. Also, we developed strategies and strategic advice for the spatial planning of several types of environments. This is an example of the way we developed a strategy for the TU Delft campus, how they can develop in further years, including businesses and new faculties, and how the interaction between students and employees of companies could improve. And here you see more concrete plans. Our office makes an example of the boulevard in Mechelen and how we transform that space into a lush green and attractive center for the city of Mechelen. Now in this presentation I will take you through 4 steps, trying to give our view and some insight on how we look at climate adaptation and mitigation in the context of city spatial planning. I'll start with some explanation of the context of the way we work in our profession, and then going more into detail in some theory about mitigation and adaptation and examples of how that can be applied. Then focusing on the aspect of scales and how they interfere with these subjects, and closing off with inspiring examples and a view how to deal with these things towards the future. All right, starting off with the context, we could ask ourselves, how did we get where we are in this context, and why does that matter? I want to start off with this image of the industrial revolution, showing how society changed and also how our cities changed. It's also the starting point of our profession. We are an office for urbanism, and real thinking about urbanism is actually thinking about people's lives and trying to improve them. Now, urbanism evolved from this industrial age. It was a time that brought rapid growth in population to factory sites in cities, and with it came slums, pollution, disease and crime to the city. And the city became a place you wouldn't want to live. As a counter effect, a belief started, a belief that city and countryside were opposites, attracting different kind of people, attracting different kind of things, and also having their own negative effects with poverty and low wages in the towns, and also poverty and low wages in the country, and actually no jobs. So there was this belief in what they called the start of believing in the garden city as the answer to urban and rural problems, a place where city and countryside could merge, and people's life would dramatically improve. Also a rise of modernism came. The modern movement changed architecture, but also changed urbanism. thoughts of how people could live in light, lush environments, spacious, and also strictly zoned and regulated, gave cities new shapes, and factory sites became cleaner. This picture is from the vanilla factory in Rotterdam. It's a beautiful place. I actually started my own career there in the architecture office that made the transformation of this building. It's now an office building again. But this was a tobacco production, and it was really aimed at having a healthy and clean environment for their workforce. But also this company built housing and neighborhoods for their employees. Now this also led to complete new layouts further away on the outskirts of the city, where the air was cleaner and where people could live healthier lives. There was more space, everybody had a decent home, and this was really also, the picture you can see was really the Dutch response to the post-war lack of housing. This was built in a very rapid phasing. So it looks very strict and rigid, but these were actually huge improvements for people living in the slums and in the degraded inner areas of the city. Now, throughout the 60s and 70s, this further on evolved in new thoughts of urbanism, like this drawing shows. This is a cauliflower neighborhood. Very many houses in the 70s in Holland were built in this way. These are neighborhoods where we call them the neighborhoods where the pizza is always cold, because the pizza delivery guy never knows what number you live on or what street to take. You're meant to lose your way in these neighborhoods, but they have huge advantages for the inhabitants. It was designed with health as a driver for the city planning of these neighborhoods, with space for kids to play, very safe neighborhoods, lush green layouts, and everybody has a view on the outsides. People could produce their own food. It was really a very, like a childhood dream for urbanism. And even more so, this suburbanization took place, of course, in North America, where we saw it evolving into a total separation of functions, with mass post-war suburbanization and complete regions extending, facilitated by new highways and these new ways of transport. In Belgium, the railways were a big part of the suburbanization movement, but in North America, of course, the new mode of transport of the car facilitated this living further away from work. And then we also see city centers, which are completely used as a business district, towers where there's just people working and you don't see anybody on the street during the day. So you got this huge conflict between suburbia and the city. So it's this garden city idea was spread out so far that again you would get completely different worlds. And thinking of health again, what are we facing today? Well, in this age we are facing new challenges in the prosperous parts of the world, and we see obesity increasing dramatically, especially among younger age groups. There's also a new challenge on the fact that we sit all the time, something which is not necessarily improving in COVID times, since we're all looking at screens and not moving enough during our day. And then there's the aspects of people getting more lonely, living alone more often, but also having problems with their social interaction. Getting more lonely, gaining weight, and therefore running into serious health problems, cardiovascular problems, respiratory problems, and these are things that also with COVID we see way more focus and a stronger focus recently on the importance of healthy living. Now, the question we asked ourselves as postdoc maximum was, how does the environment influence a person's health? And this started with understanding what health really is. And as Magdalena Huber puts it, it is the ability of people to adapt and take control in the face of physical, emotional, and social challenges in life. Meaning that if you are able to have control over your life, and you can do what you want, this is considered to be a healthy life. So you could be disabled, but still be healthy. Now, in order to understand how health works in a spatial context, we developed this triangle, and I want to take you through a little bit how it works for us. So we have on the right corner, right bottom corner, we see the context of the city. So this is the place where people live in. And you could say that if a city has ambitions to have to be more healthy, it could consider to have zero emission zones. So therefore, the context improves, which has a positive effect on all the bodies in the top of the triangle, and the health on all the people living in the city and all the visitors who come to this city. But then, if on the left bottom part of the triangle, people decide to start smoking, the overall effect on health is negative again. So therefore, a lot of people in the health department say, yes, we have to focus on awareness. We have to tell people they have to live a healthy life. They have to stop smoking. Now, imagine this works. It does work often, and of course, it's a very important aspect. So people decide they stop smoking, and they decide they want to cycle to work. And live healthier lives. So then they take the bike to work. Again, the context comes into play, and between a person's lifestyle, the first question is, can they cycle to work? So if they live very far away, like in the sprawl suburbia we see in North America, it's not even possible to cycle to work. But imagine if you live in a typical Dutch city, you could. But when you cycle to work, even in a city like Utrecht, bike paths are not always located in the healthiest places. And we indicated in research that there were traffic lights where people were actually waiting for 5 minutes in one of the dirtiest and most polluted areas of the city while cars were passing by. They had to wait for a traffic light, and they inhaled more dirty air than if they would have smoked some cigarettes. So overall, again, even with the attempt of a healthy lifestyle, the overall effect can be negative again. And this shows that we have to intervene in all connections of the triangle. So people's lifestyle connected to their health, the context connected to the health, but also the lifestyle of people connected to the context of the city is a very important one. Now, the topic of this lecture is supposed to be about climate change and not health, you might argue. Well, climate change is part of the changing context, but it has severe effects on other societal systems like mobility, energy, and health. It also requires a change in people's behavior. And to assure you, this lecture is about climate change. And therefore I put in a temperature diagram, and so it's a diagram on climate change, but it's not the one we all have in the top of our minds, showing recent history. But this is a perspective on the age of the Earth, and what we see is that there have been dramatic changes in temperature over the age of the Earth, and nature has adapted to it several times. Of course, the recent fast increase in temperature is also a threat to many species on the planet, but it is not necessarily a threat to the planet as such. It is more a threat to the survival of humankind. So this is not about the survival of the planet, it is about the survival of us, humans. And this requires a people-centric approach if we want to solve this. The triangle is therefore a useful tool to perceive this and understand how systems, people, and space interact. Health and climate change adaptation or mitigation are two sides of the same coin. If not, we risk ending up with high-tech, ultra-climate adaptive cities with a lot of unhappy and unhealthy people in them. So what have we gained then? There is this direct link between climate change impact and health. There's the direct link of flooding, which gives an increased risk of disease spreading. There is the risk of heat waves, which gives a higher risk among elderly and children of heat stroke and heat-related disorders, as we've seen in past very warm months. There's more air pollution with higher instances of asthma, cardiovascular diseases, and neurological diseases. System collapse is also a very direct cause for health threats. When our energy systems, data system, and mobility systems fail, this could lead to direct and indirect health threats regarding safety issues, but also in our health system. One of the obvious effects of the systems on the living environment is that over decades, adding layers to the city of traffic, sewage, and data, all this while space was being reduced for people and nature. And the division in layers and silos to cope with the growing complexity of our cities is a result of it. So these solutions today, funnily enough, they lie in bringing it all back together again. We have to think across these layers. And tools like these are an attempt to get grip on this complexity. This tool was developed as the wheel of the living environment, and it was based on a theory also developed by the Dutch government and also applied in the national environment vision, as it was stated by the Dutch national government. And on the right you see all these layers, the layers of occupation, but also the underground layers and the system layers of our living environment that we all need to understand in order to come to a sustainable development of our living environment. So back to the focal point of this lecture, mitigation and adaptation. Are they the same or are they similar? We believe it's an end story. Now, the theory tells us that the difference between climate change mitigation strategies and climate change adaptation strategies is that mitigation is aimed at tackling the causes and minimizing the possible impacts of climate change, whereas adaptation looks at how to reduce the negative effects it has and how to take advantage of any opportunities that arise. When mitigation strategies fail to reach emission containment targets, climate resilience will be key to lessen the impacts of climate change and pave the way for our survival, along with the rest of the Earth inhabitants. Resilience is the balance that we try to find between mitigation and adaptation. Mexico City is one of the places in the world that feel the threat of climate change due to the location it was built in what was before a lake surrounded by mountains. The lake was drained and the city was built in the valley. Because they designed against nature and water, they are now faced with almost any water issue you can think of. We're now in a stage of climate change where we need to tackle both mitigation and adaptation simultaneously. The best way to do this, and to create as many co-benefits as possible, is to look across all the layers in the city, and to look across scales. What happens on a regional level, and how will this land on a neighborhood level and a neighborhood scale, and vice versa. Parque Lineal La Vila is one of the great examples of how Mexico City uses an adaptation strategy to also stimulate a behavior change that leads to mitigation. The long parks that are placed in the center of the city and the dense neighborhoods give lush green areas to people and also makes them aware of a change in their life they can make. People start living more healthy, but they also start moving with a friendlier CO2 footprint. More and more we see these structures grow into complete systems, changing the inherent structure of the city, the behavior of the inhabitants, and the systems of the city. This sheet is an attempt to show the loop that can be made between mitigation and adaptation of city systems. When we start from the top, mitigation involves reducing emissions and reducing waste and creating circular cities that are very sustainable. Moreover, living in a city on its own is already a more sustainable way of living, having proximity of functions and less need to travel, and also combining collective energy, literally, for everything people need in their life. Also, specific mitigation involves the energy transition. Now, when we look at adaptation, it often involves changing the city systems, like sewage, waste, and energy. Nearly all adaptation measures also have spatial implications, and these spatial implications and changes change the systems and the space of the city, resulting often in a change of people's behavior. And this comes back to reducing emissions, reducing waste, and circular cities. So this is the loop we can make between adaptation and mitigation, and how they can go hand in hand as the two sides of the coin. The next part of my presentation focuses on these differences in scales and how we need to play in between those scales in order to get the maximum effect of the attempts we make. When implementing adaptation measures in the city, there are roughly two ways to proceed. One is the technical adaptation, fixing the system which is there and increasing capacity by increasing the width of the pipes in the street and implementing basins on the top or in the basement of buildings that can store water temporarily. On the other hand, there are the combinations with other transitions that make it an integral resilience. An example can be the water square, as we see on the left bottom in Rotterdam. It's a nice example of how a public space can be used, and in the case of heavy rainfall, it can store the water temporarily. Green roofs have the same function, and they cool the city, they make it more attractive, and they also add an attractive environment for people to be in, as does the greenification of more green public space, which also has another effect, and that is the one on the mobility system. Now here we see how great design helps in making great spaces for adaptation. It's an example from Chicago, the Crown Fountain in Millennium Park, where we see it's an opportunity for cooling the city and at the same way making an inclusive, accessible design. But when you have taken care of your zero emission, your water recycling, your super strong building, then the whole region floods and essential services break down, as happened in 2005 when Katrina hit New Orleans. So does that mean it is useless to focus on an object level? Well, yes and no. Every well-meant change anyone can make is a positive one, because challenges are so huge. On the other hand, because the challenges are so huge, we need to focus on all the efforts in a clever and systematic way. This means acting at multiple scale levels and playing between the lines. We believe the scales of the in-between of the neighborhood and the region are crucial in tackling challenges and moving to integral strategies for mitigation and resilience. For this, we developed a strategy for the Dutch national government, inviting cities to act on neighborhood level, taking on the challenges of the various transitions that are coming into play in the neighborhoods and their spatial context. Using the method of research by design, we show different ways of adapting a neighborhood and transforming it based on a different transition coming into play as the leading transition. In this case, showing how urbanization and densification can be the driver. In this slide, showing how the healthy and green neighborhood can be the main driver for the transformation. Or in this case, how sustainability in a centralized or decentralized way can be the main driver of transforming the neighborhood, whilst taking into account also the other transitions on health and densification. To make this change happen, systems like the mobility system need to change as well. And fortunately, technology is there to lend a hand. Smart mobility is the term used for all innovation, both low and high tech, that enables us to move in different ways. As Post and Maximum, we are engaged in several lines of research that aim to uncover the spatial impact of smart mobility. Not only does this reshape neighborhoods, but it affects the whole mobility network of the city and the connected regional daily urban system with it. Often smart mobility is perceived as an issue of mobility and an opportunity to make the mobility system more efficient. But in fact, aspects as livability of urban areas and reorganizing space to free up the much needed space for the city's resilience is a stronger driver for change. New ways of looking at mobility come into play, like moving slower but more pleasant, more healthy and more inclusive. To illustrate this, I want to briefly go into a project that we did for the city of Amsterdam, focusing on the mobility system of Strandeiland. It is an island with a new residential neighborhood, including a facility center at the beginning of the island. The question of our client was how to have the most suitable implementation of mobility hubs. The original idea was to make this a zero-emission island, leading to the need to collect all non-zero emission cars at the beginning of the island in a giant hub. Then a study was carried out and it led to a scenario which is here shown as the plus B reference. And the plan was to make a giant hub at the beginning of the island plus two slightly less giant ones in the middle of each island with inhabitants. This was a pure mathematical exercise, and it was never actually tested in the spatial context. So that is what we did together with Arcadis and Deloitte. We tested several options of spreading this system from varying from parking hubs to hubs where you only have shared mobility, and eventually also leading to a concept of what we call the street hub. So different scales were implemented, lots of small hubs or a few larger ones. We tested all the options, looked at them from a cost perspective, a mobility system perspective, and a spatial implementation perspective. And in the end, the most fitting with the idea behind the original plan of Strandeiland was this idea of the community hubs. An environment where people meet and interact, that was the idea behind Strandeiland. And these hubs, they are visible in every street. It's the place where people leave their cars or their modes of transport, and from there walk through the streets to their house. So you see people walking on the street, people get to meet, and there is a high reduction of traffic in these living streets. Now this is what these community hubs could look like. Implemented in the neighborhood, a place of interaction where people arrive and they start their day or they start their journey. And the plan was to combine these with local functions and local amenities. Here is another illustration of how it could be fitted more in the part where there is a small shopping center on the island. And here is an illustration of what it could look like really in the center of one of these neighborhoods, on the side where you have the beach on the lake. And here you also see a way of how we imagined this place to be developed. Something may be built and maintained, but also functionally programmed by the neighborhood. Having a neighborhood kitchen or a neighborhood living room where people get together and the social interaction takes place. And specifically, this aspect was the part that the city of Amsterdam really liked. And they chose this concept because of this possibility of the engagement of the inhabitants. Space defines how people can act, and people's behavior or life patterns influence how they use and adapt space. For mitigation and resilience, we need both people to change behavior as well as change the spatial context they are placed in. To change behavior and create buy-in from communities, we need an increased focus on the people whose behavior we're trying to change. There is a clear revival of citizen participation in urban design, from grassroots initiatives to active budget planning and design by entire communities through participatory budgeting. One of the strongest examples of participatory projects I know is the way the Ring of Antwerp is being transformed. Starting from the initiative of local inhabitants with a little help of designers, Ringland has had a huge impact on the way the city is going to treat its infrastructure. Leading from this to this, hopefully. A nice ambition that is being carried out by the city right now and taken very, very seriously. As cities are looking for a more resilient future, they try to look at it in a very integrated way. For the city of Rotterdam, we made their vision for the future, looking at the complete perspective of a circular, compact, productive, inclusive, and healthy city. The question was, what kind of city does Rotterdam want to be? Well, it wants to be all of these cities. Dealing with climate change, health impact for their inhabitants, but also equality, equal chances in a strong economy. The 5 future perspectives for the city of Rotterdam were envisioned from a neighborhood level to a regional level. And they all give together direction to the future of Rotterdam. Namely being the compact city, where densification and greenification go hand in hand, the inclusive city with mixed neighborhoods and space to meet and to participate, the productive city that takes into play the international trends and offers space to innovation in the making industry, and a healthy city with cleaner air, smart solutions for climate adaptation, and spatial implementation that invites to move. And in the end also the circular city, with space for recycling and for production of renewable energy. These perspectives are not meant as different choices. Their force is in integrating them. They are like a compass for civil servants to act on, for politicians to determine their future policy on, and for people with initiatives in projects to act on. They provide the flexibility to implement new ideas and developments for the city of Rotterdam. Another example of working between scales can be found in the work we do on regional development strategy, like this one for the Green Metropolitan Region of Antwerp, Nijmegen Food Valley, taking resilience and mitigation as a starting point. The inherent value of the existing natural areas and green and blue networks, both in and outside the cities, are a key element in this strategy. And rightfully so, because there is a bigger wave coming, and it is not only threatening humankind. The biggest wave of ecosystem collapse is one of the major challenges that fits in well with the interventions here. A good link with health as well. For what is good for our ecosystem is good for our health and well-being. This brings me to the final part of my lecture, showing some inspiring examples from recent history and how we can translate them into sustainable strategies for the future of our cities. Examples of further functional separation, like this in the case of Toronto, shown on this slide, is a recipe for disaster. So there is this thing about density and functional mix that determines how strong economy can thrive, how healthy an area can be, how good we can mitigate, and how resilient we can be. Now, what are these good examples? Well, the garden city that I started with shows that it has spatially more of a natural connection. But does it function as nature, and does the human ecosystem really benefit? Well, no, because functions are still very separated and the zoning is strict. Examples that are really successful are the pre-war mixed neighborhoods, creating an ecosystem of activities and destinations in proximity, leading to prosperous economic centers. The downside is the lack of green and open space due to the neighborhood setup. Often this was perceived with other intentions than people's health or connection to nature. Paris is reworking this concept now to the modern day version of a 15-minute city. Vibrant neighborhoods with everything you need within walking and cycling distance, linked to a full rethinking of public space. Cities like Melbourne, Ottawa, and Portland are following this example. Chrono-urbanism and proximity as the new baseline for urban design. Back to the trinity of people, space, and the topics we need to tackle. Space defines how people can act, and people's behavior or life patterns influence how they use and adapt space. For mitigation and resilience, we need both people to change behavior as well as change the spatial context they are placed in. And this brings me to the end of this lecture. I would like to summarize the lessons learned. The first thing we learned is that areas that are able to adapt also give more options for people to change their behavior. And this is a strong force in the change of our cities. Another thing we learn is that different issues need to be tackled at different scale levels. This requires the right governance tools to change space and in a way that allow for people to take action and change their behavior. And this also presents directly the urban dilemma. Who gets to act, who gets to invest and initiate change in order to achieve common society goals on mitigation or resilience? This is a dilemma about the influence of local, regional and national governments on spatial planning, and something that is an ongoing debate in all our countries. At Post-Maximum, we believe it is not easy to work out this dilemma, but that understanding of the complexity starts with a systematic approach. We can develop insight on what is happening where and at what scale level, and we can start to develop strategies for an integral, sustainable change. This requires insight and the ability to provide foresight. To generate powerful foresight, all fields of knowledge must be connected and translated to the spatial context. And for that, we believe there is a powerful tool at hand. This tool is the instrument of research by design, a powerful instrument that can make the link between the actual situation on the ground, involve people, connect them to the geodata that is available, and come up with new ideas and solutions that we can investigate and research through different options that can then be checked again in a geodata or a digital twin. This is how we work at Post-Maximum and how we attempt to help cities and urban areas become more sustainable and resilient. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope to see you soon in the live sessions at the University of Antwerp. And for any other questions, you can reach me at this email address or through our website and overall contacts. Thank you.